Well, the Concerto for Orchestra was written in 1945 in Bartók's final year, and unfortunately was in very bad health at the time. And also he left his native homeland, Hungary, 5 years before because of the horrible situation in Europe in 1940, as we know, fascism, Nazism and so on. He chose to move out, he didn't have to, he wasn't forced to move out. And by doing that, he left a very good life in Budapest and went to New York, where he was not well known and not very popular as a composer. And we should be very thankful to Serge Koussevitzky, the Russian conductor, who knew the situation of Bartók and who was a great admirer of Bartók. And he, with the Boston Symphony, they commissioned the Concerto for Orchestra from Bartók, who somehow, in this final year of his life, in very poor health, was able to produce one of the most uplifting and charming pieces of music in the 20th century. And unfortunately, he died a few months afterwards, and this piece became his most popular piece and his most successful one, and made him one of the most popular composers in the world of the 20th century. We all know that concerto means a piece for a soloist or a group of soloists and an orchestra. Just like it was from the time of the Baroque, from Bach, Vivaldi, through Mozart, Beethoven, and so on, through the whole Romantic period. And then comes Bartók and writes this Concerto for Orchestra, which is a bit bizarre when you think about it, but actually then it allows him to write sort of a symphony, but giving really every individual musician of the orchestra a chance to express themselves as if they're playing a concerto. And not only the usual soloists of the orchestra, for example, first oboe, first clarinet, first flute, which anyway usually gets a solo in every piece, but also the second players or the couples of the winds together, every individual brass member from the brass section, each group of the strings, and he's using different ways to achieve that. And at the end, it's a piece that is a great showpiece for any orchestra. The first movement starts with what we call night music, which comes very often in Bartók's music. Starts with the cello and basses. And then just mysterious color on top of it. In the second movement is a moment mainly of the woodwind section. Each group is playing in a different interval. You know, in music we have different intervals, from a very small interval, bigger, until an octave. And each couple is playing the whole solo in the same interval. So the bassoons are playing in an interval of 6. It's always the same. And then the oboes are playing the same interval of a third. Flutes in the same interval of fifth. And so on. So each group, each couple really has a distinct signature, let's say. It's not just the melody is different for each instrument, but also the distance between them is different each time. And this also creates a different sound for each of them, even more distinct than it already is, because of the difference in the instrument. The third movement is an elegy, is a really moment of tragedy, and one can think of, as we said, the events in Europe and the events of Bartók's personal life. And it starts with sort of a reminiscence of the first movement. You remember the first movement started? The third movement starts. around the time in the 40s, one of the most popular pieces that everybody were playing, every orchestra also in America, was Shostakovich Leningrad Symphony number 7. And it has this moment, the melody. And all of a sudden, and this melody repeats over and over again in a very obsessive manner in Shostakovich's symphony. And it became so popular that Bartók really makes a joke out of it in the 4th movement. Really becomes chaotic and stupid and clownish. And he calls this movement the Interrupting Intermezzo, because the movement is built from other subjects, other melodies. Then comes a very Hungarian melody in the middle. And instead of completing the movement and going back to the first subject as he was intending to, all of a sudden he puts the Shostakovich in the middle. It really makes it into a joke. And the last movement, very quick, very virtuosic, like a real final episode, final movement of a concerto. Everybody can show off and play as fast as possible, and it ends with this huge triumphant brass, at the beginning brass chorale, and the whole orchestra just burst into the final chords together.